Banished by family at 68, I reclaimed $50,000 secretly. They cast me out of the family at 68, stripped me of all my savings and threw me out of my own home. And yet, I secretly reclaimed my $50,000. Imagine, the children I had trusted all my life treated me with such injustice. But I didn't just accept it. I found a way to get my revenge, quietly and cleverly, proving that age does not mean helplessness. I never imagined an ordinary family lunch could turn into a catastrophe. A sunny morning, a light breeze through the open windows, the smell of fresh baking, the laughter of guests. It all seemed so cozy and safe. My daughter had called me a week earlier. "Dad, come to my small anniversary party, it'll be intimate." I didn't doubt it. 40 years old, not a huge milestone, a seemingly ordinary celebration. But that day my heart already sensed something was wrong. When I entered the house, I was met by guests, laughter, and the clinking of dishes, yet something tightened inside me. On the table, neatly placed, should have been an envelope with money, the $50,000 I had saved for a joint project with my daughter. I was surprised to notice it was gone. Strange, I thought. The envelope had vanished, but the house was in perfect order. Cups in their place, towels washed, everything seemed normal. I turned to my daughter and noticed her strange smile, cold and strained. She was standing by the kitchen, holding a glass of wine, but her gaze was icy. "Dad, you know we don't need your help with this project at all. You're too old to be involved," she said loudly for all the guests to hear. I froze as if struck by lightning. Are you serious?" I managed, trying to keep my composure. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would leap from my chest. Panic? No, it was a sharp pain and a feeling of betrayal. The guests laughed and chatted. No one seemed to notice the tension between us. But I saw everything, every glance, every movement. My daughter, whom I had raised and supported all my life, had just publicly humiliated me. I took a step toward the table. The envelope was gone. It was all carefully planned. I understood. I had been symbolically cast out. Too old, not needed, echoed in my head like a broken record. I felt anger mixed with hurt, pain, and betrayal. It seemed the ground was slipping from under my feet, yet simultaneously, a thought was born in my mind: "You'll regret this." I sat down at the table, smiling at the guests, but a plan was already forming in my head. I needed to figure out who had seen the envelope, where it could have disappeared to, who would truly support me in this situation. I discreetly observed my daughter, my son-in-law, the guests. Every word, every gesture, a small piece of the puzzle. "Grandpa, are you with us?" asked my younger granddaughter, unaware of the underlying drama. "Yes, of course, sweetheart," I said, smiling, though inside something more potent than anger was simmering. I understood. I couldn't show emotion now. I had to endure, observe, act thoughtfully. And in that moment, I realized. This anniversary, which looked like a celebration, would be the start of something much larger. The understanding that my own children had treated me so unjustly struck me harder than any physical blow. But along with it came a sense of resolve. After that lunch, the house gradually emptied. The guests departed, the laughter faded, and I was left alone in the living room, trying to process everything that had happened. But my daughter and son-in-law had stepped aside, whispering to each other as if discussing a secret I wasn't meant to know. I watched them, my heart constricting, but inside, bitterness and resentment were festering. "Why did you slip away so quietly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "What are you planning?" They exchanged a glance, and my son-in-law said with a slight sneer, "It's nothing, Dad. We just thought you'd be more comfortable." But their eyes betrayed the lie. And I knew it. I was even more shocked when my daughter leaned in close to me, her smile as cold as ice. "We thought it would be better for you to live separately. Maybe a retirement home? You could make friends there and you'd be cared for. And the money and the property? Well, we'll handle the project ourselves." Her words pierced me like a knife. I barely held back my anger. "Are you serious?" I asked, struggling not to shout. "You want to take everything I've worked for all these years? My project money, my house, and even send me away?" My daughter took a step back as if expecting me to break down. But I had no intention of losing my composure. "Dad, we're only thinking of your well-being. And the project? The money could be better used elsewhere. You're too old to manage all that," she said with a cold smile. I looked at her, restraining my fury, and said quietly but firmly, "Do you think I'm that weak? That I'll just let you treat me this way?" They laughed softly as if I were a joke. The laughter echoed in the room like a mockery of my entire life, of the labor I'd poured into this house, of every dollar I'd saved. I felt not only hurt but shock. It was all carefully planned. The public humiliation at the celebration, the breach of trust, the attempt to take my money, and the forced decision about where I should live. I sat down on the sofa, my gaze falling on the empty table where the envelope with $50,000 should have been. My heart was racing but my mind was clear. Their plan was simple: to cut me off from my property, my project, even my home. They thought I was no longer fit to interfere, that I was defenseless. But inside me resolve was hardening. I saw right through their plan. Every gesture, every whisper behind my back, it only confirmed that I needed to act intelligently and discreetly. They didn't know I knew how to wait for the right moment, to observe and to gather evidence. Let them think they've won, I said quietly to myself. But I have moves of my own. They'll regret treating me this way. I understood I needed to proceed with caution. I couldn't rush into an open conflict. I had to figure out where the money had disappeared to, who might have seen the envelope, and how I could regain control of the project. I also began to think about the house. They believed they could easily take it over by sending me into care, at a retirement home, where, in their opinion, I would make friends and forget about everything else. But I knew better. This was merely the appearance of care. Under the guise of concern, they wanted total control over my assets and to remove me from the family for good. I sat, leaning forward with my hands on my knees, and closed my eyes. A plan was already forming in my mind. To observe secretly, to seek allies among friends and neighbors, to document every action of my daughter and son-in-law, to have proof of their intentions. Every word they spoke, every smile, it was a small piece of the puzzle I needed to assemble. In that moment, I understood that the conflict was only just beginning. My daughter and son-in-law thought I was broken, that I would simply fade into the background. But in reality, I was already gathering all the pieces to reclaim what was mine: the money, control of the project, and ultimately the house. And I was prepared to act wisely, covertly, and patiently. I stood up, looked at the empty table, and muttered under my breath, "You'll regret this. I'll show you that age doesn't mean helplessness." And that evening, for the first time, I realized the real fight for justice was only just beginning. The weeks following that ill-fated lunch were the hardest of my life. My daughter and son-in-law began to act subtly but decisively. One day, a social worker came to see me. It was all arranged by my daughter. "Dad, it's for the best so you can be looked after," he said with a smile. "You'll make new friends here, it's safe, it's comfortable." I knew it was just a pretext. They wanted me out of my house, where part of my savings was kept, and to stop me from interfering in family matters. Under the guise of concern for my health, I was taken to a retirement home, and the keys to my house remained with my daughter. At first, I tried to reach out to other relatives for support. But the fear was palpable. Everyone was afraid of my daughter and her influence. "What if she gets angry with us?" they whispered, hiding behind words and smiles. I felt utterly alone. No one believed they could stand up to her cunning. My attempts to prove that the $50,000 belonged to me hit wall after wall. I tried everything: letters, bank statements, old agreements, even a photo of the envelope with the money. Each time, my daughter managed to muddy the evidence. "That's money for the project, which we are managing," she would say. Every refusal, every new obstacle brought me close to despair. It seemed there was almost no chance of getting back what was mine. I would wake up at night and think, is this the end? Have I truly lost everything? My home, my money, their trust. My heart ached from the betrayal, while my mind searched for even the faintest thread of hope. And then they appeared. New faces, people I had known for years but never expected to see in such a role. First, it was just a neighbor, Maria, with whom I sometimes exchanged smiles over the fence. One day, she quietly approached me in the retirement home's dining hall. "I've noticed how your daughter behaves. Things aren't as simple as she makes them seem," she said, glancing around. Then came an old friend, Victor, a neighbor from down the street with whom I used to play chess. He saw my despair and said, "Don't worry, we'll figure this out. But we need to be careful." Their appearance was the first ray of hope. Until that moment, it had felt like I was completely alone. Now, someone was observing the situation with me, someone who could secretly monitor my daughter and her spending, someone who might spot the inconsistencies and the tricks. I sat on the bed, holding my head in my hands, and for the first time in many days I felt there might be a way out. New allies had quietly entered my life. They didn't reveal the details of how they would help, but their presence promised a chance to regain control and prove that justice was still possible. All is not lost, I thought, and a faint smile appeared on my lips for the first time in weeks. A sense of resolve grew inside me. The problems, the despair, the fear, they were left at the door. The neighbor and the friend were familiar symbols that even in the darkest moments, Support can be found and the fight is not over. And though I didn't yet know exactly how they would help, I felt it. The game was only just beginning. Several weeks had passed since that ill-fated lunch. The retirement home had become my temporary dwelling, but thoughts of my house, the project, and most of all, the lost $50,000 haunted me day and night. I was sitting on an old sofa, staring at the familiar walls and quiet corridors, when my neighbor Maria entered the room. She peeked in as if out of habit, with a smile and a touch of concern. "How are you, Josh?" she asked, sitting down beside me. "I just stopped by to check on you. Are you all right?" I nodded, but my eyes betrayed my anxiety. We chatted about everyday trivialities, but Maria inadvertently overheard my inner monologue. I was once again replaying the events of that lunch and my attempts to recover the money. At one point, her gaze grew intent, and her voice dropped to a quiet, almost conspiratorial whisper. "Have you heard what your daughter said about the bank?" she asked unexpectedly. "Part of your money is there, though the safe deposit box access is blocked." I started. "Part of the money?" I thought. My heart began to beat faster, as if a long-locked door had suddenly swung open. Maria nodded, and I understood. She had overheard it by chance, but this knowledge was the chance I had been waiting for. I told Maria what I knew about the envelope, the blocked access, and how my daughter had managed to hide part of my savings. We sat side by side discussing a plan, but cautiously, so none of the staff would hear. Maria listened, nodding attentively, her eyes shining with interest and resolve. That same day, another surprising thing happened. My granddaughter, young but remarkably sharp, was chatting on the phone with a friend. I was sitting nearby but didn't expect her to say anything important. Yet, unaware that I could hear, she said, "Yeah, Grandpa knows some of the money is in the bank. Mom doesn't suspect a thing." My eyes widened. My heart leapt. All this time, I had nearly despaired, having tried every method to prove the money was mine. Bank statements, old agreements, photos of the envelope, everything had been blocked or disputed by my daughter. It seemed I was facing an impenetrable wall. But now, my granddaughter had accidentally opened a window of opportunity. Maria and I exchanged a look. Resolve flared inside me again. At first, I had been afraid to act openly, afraid my daughter would notice my movements and cut off my access to the house and the project for good. Support from other relatives was minimal. They were afraid to oppose my daughter, fearful of her influence and her cunning. Now I had a chance. Maria, a neighbor, a quiet observer and ally, and my granddaughter, smart, trusting, and fiercely loyal to me. We understood we had to proceed carefully, gathering information and planning our next steps. I began to recall how my daughter had handled the envelope. She kept it in the bank, blocking access under the pretext of controlling the project. Her confidence that I would never find out had played right into my hands. She never suspected that the neighbor who sometimes visited me had accidentally overheard a conversation about the hidden safe deposit box. "Grandpa," my granddaughter said quietly, "if we act carefully we can figure it all out. Let's start by just observing, gathering facts. I can keep an eye on where she transfers the money, and you can help me document everything." I nodded. My heart filled with a flicker of hope. My mind began working faster, constructing a plan of action. Every word my daughter spoke, every transaction, every move she made, it could all now be documented to prove the truth. My granddaughter asked, "Grandpa, are you really sure we can do this?" I looked at her and smiled quietly. "Yes, sweetheart. We're not just getting the money back. We need to restore justice too." The three of us, me, my granddaughter, and the neighbor, sat in the room quietly discussing possible steps without revealing the details. I understood that I now had allies who could watch my daughter, record her actions, and help me proceed with caution. I sat by the window, watching the first rays of sunlight fall on the deserted courtyard. Maria and I were quietly discussing our next move, as if we didn't want anyone to overhear our conversation. My granddaughter ran into the room, unusually cheerful and smiling. "Grandpa, I think I know the password to the bank safe deposit box," she said suddenly, her eyes shining with excitement. I peeked at Mom when she was typing it into her phone. She didn't notice a thing. My heart stopped. At first I didn't believe it, then I understood. The chance I'd been waiting for these past few months had arrived unexpectedly. I carefully asked again, "Are you sure you remember it correctly?" She nodded, quietly, almost in a whisper. "Yes, Grandpa. I remember everything." Maria, my neighbor, sat motionless, observing our conversation, understanding the importance of the moment. We devised a plan, to act quietly, unhurriedly, without any fuss. I wrote down the password, checked every step, and my heart beat faster and faster. That evening, I went to the storage facility and for the first time in many months, accessed the bank's safe deposit box. In my hands was an envelope with documents and bank cards, and I understood that the $50,000 was still there. My breathing steadied, but inside, joy and satisfaction raged. I carefully transferred the funds to my personal account, leaving no trace so my daughter wouldn't suspect a thing. Finally, I whispered quietly, holding the card with the money that was rightfully mine. Finally, justice is on my side. But the moment of truth came later when I contacted my old friend, a lawyer, to discuss how to achieve moral justice and restore my property rights if my daughter decided to challenge my actions in court. "Josh," he said, looking at me seriously, "you need to understand, your daughter violated your trust and the rules of inheritance. That $50,000 belongs to you just like the house. You can restore justice through legal means without entering into an open conflict." This was the moment of truth. I realized that cunning, patience, and observing my daughter had given me the key to justice. Her arrogance, her confidence that I was too old to understand anything, had played right into my hands. She had left traces, and now I could act not aggressively, but through the law and careful observation. I sat in my chair holding the phone, the notes, the cards, and the documents in front of me, and thought about how long I had waited for this moment. Almost a year of battling a sense of injustice, almost a year of hurt, fear, and despair, and it had all led to this shocking revelation. The money wasn't lost and my daughter had shown her true colors. My granddaughter quietly approached, took my hand and said, "Grandpa, I knew you could do it. We did it together." Maria nodded, smiling slightly, and in her eyes, I saw respect and acknowledgement. For the first time, I felt that the years of loneliness and betrayal had not been in vain. The three of us sat together, surrounded by complete silence, a silence filled with satisfaction and quiet joy. I understood that I could now act calmly. The money was in my account, I had proof that my daughter had violated my trust, and I had a plan to restore justice through the courts. A moment of resolve and clarity, and a whole year of suffering had found its logical conclusion. I looked at my granddaughter. "Remember, sweetheart, sometimes patience and observation are your strongest allies." She smiled and nodded. Maria added quietly, "And sometimes help comes from those you least expect." My heart filled with pride and relief. The conflict wasn't over yet, but I had taken the first crucial step toward a moral and financial victory. And most importantly, I knew that I could now act calmly, with intelligence and without unnecessary emotion, relying on the truth and the law. And for the first time in many months, I allowed myself to relax, understanding that the immediate storm had passed, and ahead lay a moment of justice and a hard-won victory. Nearly 6 months had passed since I first regained access to my $50,000. 6 months filled with bureaucratic red tape, consultations with my lawyer, court appearances, and the quiet observation of my daughter. Each day felt like an endless struggle, but I understood that what was at stake was not just the return of the money, but the restoration of justice, my own dignity, and my right to my home. At first, I was afraid my daughter would use her influence, intimidate witnesses, or twist the facts. She tried to act as if everything I had done was illegal. But I remained calm. Every document, every bank statement, every letter in which she admitted to controlling my project, it had all been meticulously gathered. My lawyer called it quiet but irrefutable evidence. "Josh," he said one day in his office, sifting through the papers, "you aren't shouting, accusing, or making a scene. But the court sees logic and facts. Everything is on your side." I nodded. Inside, I felt a confidence mixed with patience. I understood that my daughter's anger was her only argument. She couldn't dispute the facts, and her rage only highlighted the injustice she herself had created. The day of the hearing arrived. I entered the courtroom with a straight back, composed, without excessive emotion. My granddaughter sat in the front row, holding my hand, and I saw trust and support in her eyes. Maria, my neighbor, smiled quietly from the other end of the room. And that was my army, quiet but strong. My daughter began with shouting, accusations, and mockery. She tried to show the court that I was too old to manage money, that I was incompetent, that my actions were chaotic and dangerous for the project. But it all sounded absurd against the backdrop of the evidence I had provided. Bank documents, the envelope, correspondence, and recordings. I stood up calmly, presented my evidence, and explained the situation succinctly and clearly. The money was mine from the beginning. I never transferred management of it to my daughter without written consent and conditions. All my actions were legal. And the fact that access to the safe deposit box was blocked without my knowledge proves an attempt to restrict my rights. The judge listened attentively, nodding occasionally. My daughter flushed, her voice trembling. She tried to interrupt me, but my lawyer gently reminded her of the protocol and she fell silent. I didn't shout or show anger. I was calm. My confidence came from facts and logic. A few hours later, the court ruled. My $50,000 was to be returned in full, my daughter was ordered to cover my legal costs, and her attempt to transfer my property without my consent was declared invalid. Furthermore, the house I had lived in before my banishment was returned to me as the rightful owner. I felt the tension of the past months gradually leave my body. It was as if a heavy cloud had dispersed, revealing the sun. Leaving the courthouse, I looked at my granddaughter and Maria. They were smiling and I understood. The victory was not just financial but moral. We had won together without violence, without shouting, through the power of calmness, cunning, and patience. The house I finally returned to greeted me with the familiar scent of old books, furniture, and the tea I had brewed for years. Every room seemed joyful, as if welcoming back its owner. On the table, I left an envelope with a letter for my neighbor and my granddaughter, an invitation to take a trip together, a symbol that cunning, calm, and support had triumphed over anger and injustice. "Thank you for being with me," I said, holding their hands. "I couldn't have done it without you." My granddaughter smiled. "Grandpa, you always said it's important to be patient and to observe. Now I see that it's true." I looked around at the house, the money, my allies, and for the first time in many months I felt in control. Control over my life, over the situation, over the injustice. My daughter was shocked. She tried to justify herself, but it was too late. She realized that her games and schemes had not gone unnoticed, and I had proven that age and calm can defeat arrogance and cunning. I sat in my favorite armchair, holding the documents, the cards, and the keys to the house. In my soul was a light, almost childlike feeling of joy and satisfaction. A financial victory, a moral triumph, the return of my home, it all intertwined into a sense of justice achieved without violence, without shouting, but through patience, cunning, and the support of those close to me. Inside I felt pride and peace. I had passed through hurt, betrayal, and despair, and had finally received the restitution I deserved. The house was mine, the money was mine, justice had been restored. And as evening fell over the city, I smiled, knowing that true victory lies not in shouting or aggression, but in confidence, honesty, and the ability to wait for your moment.